Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're having a good week. We're having a good one here. Excited today to have what I'm going to call an old friend come join us, Dr. James Renihan. And Dr. James Renihan is president of the Institute for Reformed Baptist Studies, located in Mansfield, Texas now. Before I bring him on, I just want to share a story. We were having the Super Bowl outreach in San Francisco in 2016. And so at the time, the seminary was located, it was part of the Westminster Seminary in San Diego. And we invited Dr. Renihan to come up and speak to us up there. And, pretty much he took a chance to come up there and speak to a group of preachers up there. And he's been a great friend ever since. He's a wonderful teacher, runs a great seminary, a wonderful theologian, all the things you would love to have, and a president of a seminary and a pastor and so forth. So he's definitely a delightful man. So I'm going to bring him on, and we're going to talk to him about his journey into in seminary, sort of Christian seminary work.
Hi, Bill.
Dr. Dan, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, although the guy you just described couldn't come, so I'm just his replacement.
You're going to stand in for him today?
Yeah, that's me, yeah.
Well, you'll do a good job. That was, did you just, I don't know, not that you're sitting around thinking about this very often, but when you came up to San Francisco, were you apprehensive at all or just glad to come?
I was really glad to come. Didn't know what to expect. Thoroughly enjoyed that morning. There must have been 50, 60 men in the room. Yeah. And they were really responsive, and I was really thankful.
That was a fun time. And then, just in our world, having someone like yourself come and speak to us was such a thrill. And then you've been so kind over the years to introduce us to different people, pastors in your world. And so it is an exciting thing, honestly, to meet someone who is a studied pastor theologian. And you bring such a depth of perspective, not only on the text, but on the Christian ministry life.
Oh,
and so tell us that, how did you get into, just in general, in your own life? So there's one day you were a Christian at some age, and give us all the details you want. The next day you said, hey, I want to enter Christian ministry. What happened to lead you to sort of, quote, make that decision or follow that calling?
Yeah, I was converted at age 15, grew up in New England in Massachusetts. It was a typical church, evangelical church, but we had a very active youth group. And one of the things that you did when you were a teenager in that youth group was volunteer for full-time Christian service. So most of us did. I went off to Bible college, graduated, and was completely convinced that I had no business going into the ministry, that it had not prepared me for being a pastor. So I got married. My wife and I were considering what we should do for our future. And the leadership in our church, there were about 8 of them, did something I think very, very wise. And they were meeting with all the young guys about my age, early 20s, and they were asking the question, what are you going to do with your life? And I went in and told them I was on the verge of accepting a job in a Christian bookstore, would have had to move away to do it. They said, no, don't do that. We believe you ought to go into the ministry. You ought to go to seminary and go to the ministry. So when 8 of the men in your church that you highly esteem unanimously tell you that that's what they think you ought to do, and of course, I already had within me some kind of desires. I wanted to be in Christian work. With all of that in the background, I thought, this is the Lord's will. I can't deny this. And so my wife and I went off and trained and went into the ministry.
So during that time, just if you can reflect, what you trusted them, obviously they had seen you grow up in the church and so forth. What might you say spiritually? How was God working in that beyond what you were seeing to convince you this was the path, or was it just a brand new revelation when they said, hey, we don't want you to do that. We want you to go into ministry?
No, it was something that was in my mind. I love to study the scriptures. I love to be part of, every time the doors opened at the church, I was there, and I wanted to be part of it. And the same with my wife. She grew up in a family, they were at everything. So it was, that was central in our lives. And I think that this was very good. I had so much hesitancy and self-doubt that I wasn't willing to take the step on my own. And I really needed the voices of those men. I don't know if this is the right word to use, to push me, but really to help me, maybe to reach over and grab my hand and pull me into thinking the way that I ought to be thinking. So certainly there was that internal call, but I think rightly I was reluctant to proceed on my own with my own ideas, my own thoughts, and waited for some kind of affirmation that came from a church.
So, were you trained in a sense, or the church operate in a sense where you look to your elders for guidance and so forth, or was that an unusual experience in the life of the church?
Um, I think it was fairly unusual. I think it was a new action that they were taking. Interestingly enough, I'd have to go back and count, but I think that there were 10 or 11 of us men who they counseled, and most went into the ministry, and most of them today are either still in the ministry or they're just retiring from the ministry because we're all pushing towards 70 years old. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. A church of probably 200, nothing special about that church, no reputation, no famous preacher or anything, but it sent out a lot of men to do the work of the ministry. I'm really thankful for it.
It's really cool. You don't hear that story very often where there's a big
Mm.
push. My pastor in Atlanta, Dr. James Saxon, one of the assistants, he actually went to a church and same kind of thing. That the pastor there was very, really encouraged guys to enter that realm. So you get confidence. It's the thing to do. What happens then? Where do you go? What was your next step?
Yeah, my next step was to look into schools, and there was a new school that had just started up in New Jersey called Trinity Ministerial Academy. Some people may know Albert N. Martin, a
Oh
very
yes,
famous
sure.
preacher,
Yeah,
and
and love.
it was his church that began the school. So I decided that I wanted to go there. My pastor was content with that. He was willing to recommend me, and so we, in 1980, my wife and I moved to New Jersey, and I spent 3 years there at Trinity Ministerial Academy.
And was it what you expected? Was it just a brand new world, or were you like, "Hey, this is way beyond what I could ever ask or thought"?
Um, well, let's see. I had already been to Bible college,
Yeah.
and so I had some background in reading biblical material, theological material. I had taken Greek before, so it, it was a step above anything that I had known in college, but it was familiar in terms of the type and the approach to things. Certainly, it's what I needed, and I learned a great deal, and it helped me to advance a long way in my understanding, in my desire for the ministry.
And so, in that sense, you never looked back or said, "Hey, what am I doing here? This is not what I expected." You were just full speed ahead, and loving it.
Well, I still, especially for the first year, had doubts. And I can remember talking to one of the pastors there in New Jersey about my doubts, and he affirmed that it was actually a good thing to have some doubts and cautions. And it really wasn't until my third year that I came to the conclusion that I was certain that I ought to go into the ministry. And so graduated in May, uh, went back to Massachusetts for a year, waiting to see what God would have us do, and finally received a call to be a pastor in 1984. I was 28 years old at that time.
what was the core of the doubt? Just trying to please God, God's will, or your own sort of human apprehension?
Well, I think that it was, I hope that I'm interpreting this correctly. I think that it was a work of the Holy Spirit to cause me not to trust myself. Because even in pastoral ministry, I used to find that Saturday night was the most difficult night of the year because I was anticipating what I was going to do the next day in preaching, and I was so overwhelmed with the responsibility of bringing God's word to people, knowing my own inadequacies, my own inabilities, and wanting to be faithful to the scriptures and useful in the souls of God's people. That oftentimes on Saturday nights when I was a young man, I would be up, walking around the house, praying, preparing, and all of that I think was so that I was the spirit was keeping me from being a brash young man who thought that he could change the world, and really helping me to learn to depend upon him for the work that I was doing.
That's great work. So you're off to become a pastor at 28. How many years were you a pastor?
Oh, let's see. Well, I was ordained in 84, and I was basically in pastoral ministry until 98. So that's 24 years there. And then came, now there were interruptions, the doctoral work and all the rest. But so in active direct pastoral ministry, almost 24 years.
All right, so what I want to ask now is, like, you entered this academic realm of ministry. How did that unfold? Was it along the way of your as a pastor? How did that open up?
Yeah. Well, after about, let's see, 5 years in the ministry, I still felt like there was a lot that I could learn. And so I went back to school while I was pastoring to work on matters of pastoral ministry itself, not just preaching, but I mean interaction with people and such things. And I was really helped by that. And my whole purpose of going back to school was simply to grow as a man. I'm an introverted person. I wanted to overcome my introversion and be able to be better with people and learn how to do that through the scriptures and through good teachers. So that was my sole purpose going back to school. But when I went back, the professors, one or two of them, took me aside and said, "We think you have what is necessary to keep going. We would urge you to look into the possibility of further studies." So once again, because somebody told me, somebody that I highly esteem told me that they thought I should do that, I began to look into it. And I decided that, of course, you don't know the Lord's will when you're facing these kind of situations. There's no text in the Bible that's going to tell you to go do this. But I made application just to one school, and because I wanted to study under one man, and I thought, if I get in, I'll go. If I don't get in, okay, that's the Lord's will. And it was Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and it was Tom Nettles that I wanted to study with. And lo and behold, to my complete surprise, I was admitted to their PhD program. I really didn't expect that I would be able to get in. There were significant obstacles, but I made the application and they took me. And so in 1992, my wife and I, and then we had 4 kids, moved to southern Wisconsin. It was less expensive to live in Wisconsin than Illinois. And so I started that program. I was there doing the academic work for 2 years, loved it, really enjoyed myself during those 2 years. Then I had to go to England to do research for my dissertation, which meant I wouldn't be able to take my family with me. I didn't expect to go for an extended period of time, but I knew it would be a long period of time, a couple of months. So an opportunity arose for us to move back to a house next door to my in-laws. I figured if my wife needs anything, all she has to do is open the window and yell "Dad," and she's taken care of. What better place to go, right? So we moved back there, and I went to England and did my work and came home. And in a completely unexpected providence, I mean, I had no idea this was coming, got involved in a church planting situation just a mile from our house where we were living, and was very happy to be doing that. It's in our hometown. We're living next door to my wife's parents. I baptized my mother, who became a charter member in this church plant. My brother and his wife were founding members of the church. This was right. And so I thought that I would be doing that for the rest of my life. Finished off my degree, and then was asked to go to California and start the program at Westminster Seminary. And that was a trial, a good one. It was a very positive experience. But with the involvement of our church and days of prayer and fasting and discussions at members' meetings, finally we all came to the conclusion that it was the right thing to do. And so in 98, we moved to California and began the work of teaching. And basically I've been doing that ever since.
So in that process of being a pastor, applying to TEDS and so forth, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Did the academic part begin to surface? Obviously, you obviously have an aptitude for academics and so forth. Was that a discovery on your part? Like, hey, this is something I can I'm really good at, or God made me this way? How did that begin to just capture your attention? Because that's a full time that's a full time commitment right there, in addition to pastoring.
Well,
What caught you thinking about the academic work?
I had done well in college and in seminary, um, and so I think I was convinced just on the basis of the grades I was receiving and the joy of reading the books and doing the work, and with the acknowledgement of my professors, all of that came together to say, you know, you should go ahead and try to do this, and so I did.
Did anyone say, well, the church only has pastors, preachers, teachers, and say this is not a church job, or was there any resistance like that that you had to sort of overcome?
You know, it's interesting. I remember one time talking to D.A. Carson um, about this. And one of the things he said was churches need pastors with PhDs, which really struck me. And I think he's right. Not certainly not every church, but I think there are men who can be solid and sound pastors who have earned the degrees and can use them for good, especially if they're in a university town or someplace like that. And the city that we grew up in had lots of colleges. Um, I thought that, of course, I never intended to go back there, but when we did and got involved in the church plant and began to see the thing really grow, I thought, well, this is good, and it helped to equip me for this work that I'm doing. I never expected to leave it and move to California.
Did you enjoy the pastoral work of being a pastor, or was your greatest joy sort of the study and the preaching?
I came to enjoy both. There was a fellow who was with me there. He was sort of the initial church planter. He and I developed a really close relationship, and he was a great assistant. We would go visit together, and I got to the point where I really enjoyed doing those things and was happy in them.
Well, cool. I got to ask you? So, in terms of church planning, did you quote do evangelism or cold evangelism, or just people coming in that you knew? Y'all probably knew a lot of people since you're from there.
We in I inherited a situation where, well, yes, first we did do evangelism. We visited the whole area where we lived, but we also had something going in the summertime in a couple of the parks in the city where groups from churches elsewhere would come and work with us and put on a week of it would let me call it extended vacation Bible school. It was a full day program, 5 days a week, and typically we would have 250, 300 kids every week attending those day camps.
Wow.
That gave us an opportunity to meet lots of families. And so we would go out in the evening and talk to anyone who was interested. Of course, pass out cards and talk to people and anyone who was interested. And so we had the opportunity to get into a lot of homes and to talk to people that way. And to a large degree, that's how the church grew. We would go in, and I realized we needed to be able to speak to a lot of these people who were very unchurched and secular in a simple way. So we developed a conversation that we would be able to have with them, and people would say, "What's your church about?" And we would say, "Well, two things. We have a big God and we have a big book." And they, "What do you mean?" So that opened the door for us to talk about that we believe that God was the creator and God was sovereign over all things, and he guided the world. And a big book, the Bible, in which we take seriously what the Bible teaches. And you can imagine that that's 30 minutes of conversation. I'm
Sure,
summarizing it in 30 seconds. But that was a
sure.
very effective way that we found to be able to talk to people who didn't really have a church background, a big God and a big book, and that opened the door for us to talk to them. So we had many of those conversations.
That's pretty cool. So, because obviously seminary is a Reformed Baptist seminary, were you raised Reformed Baptist, or why are you Reformed Baptist?
No, I wasn't. Um, as a child, I grew up in a Swedish church. My mother was Swedish, and it was a traditional Protestant church. It wasn't liberal, but it also didn't preach, "You must be born again." Everybody was a Christian because you went to that church. and you were baptized there. And it was through some friends in a Baptist church in our city that I came to faith when I was about 15. So I became a Christian, but having heard all the Bible stories, I had that all in my head. And, it was like the Apostle Paul. He studied under a Gamaliel and he had everything that he needed. And then he's converted and all of a sudden the light goes on. Well, in a sense, that's what happened to me. I'm thankful for that church that I grew up in because they did teach us the Bible stories in the Old Testament and in the Gospels weekly in Sunday school and in church. But when I was converted, it was an evangelical church, very much. Well, I'll give you an example. When we were in high school, they used to show the Billy Graham crusades on local TV when he'd go to a town, and every night they'd be Billy Graham. So we'd all gather together at somebody's house to watch Billy Graham. He was the hero. So it was a church. You can figure that it was like all of the churches that follow along with Billy Graham. Certainly evangelical, not liberal in any sense, but that's what it was. When I was in college, I began to read. Well, I had a professor for history of Western civilization. And when he came to talk about the Reformation and the 5 points of Calvinism, I thought, that makes sense to me. If God is God, he must be sovereign. And that set me on the path to start reading books, Banner of Truth books, The Reformed Doctrine of Predestination by Lorraine Bettner, other books like that, which then, through the process, which I'm sure you're familiar with, you read more and more books. And I went to Liberty University way back when it was Liberty Baptist College, not a Calvinistic stronghold. But when I graduated and had that experience with the men in my church who said you need to go to seminary, by that point I had basically been settled in my Reformed convictions, and that's why I chose to go to Trinity Ministerial Academy.
That's interesting. So you headed out to San Diego to start the school. What at that point, what were you trying to accomplish? Was it to establish a Reformed Baptist Seminary to train pastors and PhDs? What were you thinking was going to happen when you got there?
Well, our goal was simply to work with Westminster. They always had about 10% of their student body who were Baptists.
Okay.
And Bob Godfrey, who was then president, felt that by bringing in a Baptist, he could help these men and give them direction. So my goal when I went there was simply to help prepare men for pastoral ministry. And over the course of 20 years, we had many graduates. Most of them went out into pastoral ministry. Some went on for other degrees, but primarily they went either overseas to missions or pastoral ministry. And so the goal was to prepare men to go into churches. When the time came for us to move, and it wasn't because we were unhappy with Westminster, nor were they unhappy with us. It was that we saw an opportunity to develop a program that was really just an add-on to the Westminster degree into a full-blown seminary program. But still, our goal is primarily to train men for pastoral ministry. That's what it's all about. So we have, not only do we have the really fine curriculum, but we have an extensive internship program that all of the Master of Divinity students have to complete. We also have a Bachelor of Divinity degree for men over 30 who don't have a bachelor's degree, can't qualify to get into the master's program. But it's essentially the same as the Master of Divinity program. It's just, the reason we have that is we want to work with churches to train men. And we don't believe if a guy's 35 and has 3 kids, we don't think he should have to go back to college first. We think he's got enough life experience. If his church commends him, we'll take him and we'll put him into that Bachelor of Divinity program.
So what is make the case, if you will, the argument to get a seminary education versus someone says, I've just got the Bible, God in me, he'll teach me everything I need to know. What do you say to that? How do you encourage people to take on that responsibility of seminary studies?
Well, I mean, my first response is a really wise guy response. I'm not sure I should say it. It's like, you're probably going to end up a heretic. Because if you think that you're wise enough to study the Word of God and come to conclusions without regard to anybody else or what the Holy Spirit has taught the church for 2,000 years, you've got an ego problem to start out with. what you need to do is be humble and think about the fact that Jesus promised that the Spirit would come and guide his people into all truth. And now, 2,000 years, we are the heirs of 2,000 years of the Spirit's work in leading people into truth. When Paul speaks to Timothy in 2 Timothy 1 and 2, I wish that there wasn't a chapter division there, because actually the flow of thought continues from the end of 1 to the beginning of chapter 2. There's a 5-step process that Paul lays out there. He receives the truth from heaven. That's step 1. He passes it on to Timothy, who passes it on to faithful men who will be able to teach others. So you have heaven, Paul, Timothy, faithful men, and others. So that the deposit of truth, as it's sometimes translated, I think that's a good rendering of what Paul says. The deposit of truth is something that's passed on to others. It's not discovered by individuals, but it comes from one to another to another. Now, in addition to that, we live in a culture that's far removed from the Jewish culture of first century Jerusalem. Even away from Jerusalem, it was a very different culture. Ours is a growingly secular culture, anti-Christian culture, all kinds of opposition to the faith, a growing multi, a perspective on all faiths. You've seen the bumper sticker coexist, and it has all the emblems of the different religions. We live in that kind of world. How are we going to answer that? Well, we need to know the truth thoroughly and completely in order to do so. Think of Paul, okay? Paul had 2 methods of preaching. When he went into Jewish circumstances, Peter is the same way. You go into Jewish circumstances, and the message is, I'm here to tell you about Jesus the Messiah, who fulfills the promises that are given to the fathers. There's a common theology that Peter and Paul and others are able to assume in those environments. So they don't have to do a lot of pre-evangelism work. That's Francis Schaeffer's phrase. But when you find them in Gentile contexts, they can't make that assumption. They have to go all the way back to creation, the doctrine of God in creation. Whether it's Paul in not Troas, like Lycaonia, or it's Paul in Athens, they have to go back to the beginning and challenge the ideas of the Gentiles that they are preaching to. And Paul does it by being even well aware of Greek literature. 4 times in the New Testament, he cites Greek poets or philosophers. So he's well versed in the background material of the culture. And I would argue that's an example to us of the importance of this. The same with Paul's in Acts 22, when the riot is taking place in Jerusalem, and he stands up and he says, many of you know that I sat here in this city and was trained at the feet of Gamaliel. He's trying to make a contact with them, and in a sense saying, I went to the best rabbinical training school of the day, and that's where I got my information. Paul didn't just have things dropped into his mind. He worked hard, and he learned many things, and God used what he did. And I think all of that together says to be in ministry requires a high level of training.
I see what you're saying. So talk to us then about RBS. Just describe the school and how you, when you left, how you sort of organized it, and what someone, if they contact you about attending, what world would they enter, so to speak?
Yeah, it's now called International Reformed Baptist Seminary. We've wanted to keep the IRBS. We have over 100 students. The majority of them are distant students. We're not a typical distance school, though, because we require, well, let me put it this way, almost all of our classes are live streamed, and we require our students to be in the virtual classroom. Now, we do make some allowances for that, especially because we have students on the other side of the Pacific, and time zone differences can be very difficult for them. So we have workarounds for those things. But generally speaking, we want students to be in the classroom. We want them interacting with the professors and with each other. We offer 5 options. The Master of Divinity is the sort of the Cadillac. That's what we primarily are doing. We have a Master of Arts in Religion, which is a 2-year program. We do admit women to the Master of Arts of Religion. We have the Bachelor of Divinity degree, which is the same as the MDiv, just for men who don't qualify to be in a master's program. We have a certificate, which is, I think, 5 or 6 courses for anyone, well, for pastors and elders and deacons, especially pastors who maybe have gone to another seminary somewhere and would like some Reformed Baptist training. And that's for them. That's been well received. And then the 5th category, we have our special students who can take up to 20 credit hours without declaring for any specific program. We also offer all of these courses to auditors. We have a program of cooperating churches, supporting churches. And if the churches support us, I think it's $200 a month or $2,400 a year, their officers can all audit for free. So we have a lot of pastors from supporting churches who are in our classroom on a daily basis and who are participating in the work. It's just been fantastic. We have, I think the best thing about our school is our faculty. We have an absolutely fantastic group of professors. They're pastors and they know their stuff really well and they communicate really well and they help men to understand how to take what they're learning in the classroom and put it into practice in their ministries in their churches. One of the questions I remind them they need to ask as they're teaching is how do I put this, how do you preach this? How do you turn this into a sermon? And I think our guys do really well in helping students to understand that. So been just a wonderful experience, really encouraged by it.
Does your student body, just a couple more questions, I know got a few minutes left. Are they all typically on the same trajectory? They're entering the pastorate and they've come to get educated, so to speak, in a Reformed Baptist. They're getting into the pastor in a Reformed Baptist church and they've come to get educated. Is that a typical student that you have?
Yeah, the majority of the students would be in the Master of Divinity program.
Gotcha. And I'll ask you one more thing. Just talk for a second about, do you offer residential as well?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, we do. If anyone wants to come here to Texas, all of the courses are offered residentially. We've got, last week, Dr. Barcelos was here to teach hermeneutics. This week, we've got a course going in pastoral theology. In a couple of weeks, Dr. Dolezal will be here to teach his class. So, yes, for sure, we would love to have residential students.
So what you have here is like, but really from back at the beginning with your, back in high school when you entered Bible college, you have a model, so to speak, of a pastor, well-educated and able to interact like you described Paul or back at the church plant. And just, that's what you're really, that's your model of a pastor. Is that correct? And so the seminary really brings that to life and puts someone in that, creates that, that's the model that they would, the world they would enter to come to RVS. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Of course, every one of those who is a distance student, that's molded by their own church. Gotcha. Because the internship program is intentionally made so that it can be adapted by a church anywhere. So that our students in Australia, for example, are perhaps working out their internship slightly differently to a student who might be from Illinois, because we want them to be prepared to minister locally.
Gotcha. All right, let's see if I can honestly ask 2 questions. One, what in your experience, again, with the model that you're presenting, in a sense, when someone says, apart from the you become a heretic, when someone doesn't embrace the educational aspect of the pastorate work, what is a typical consequence, shall you say, to their congregation? Let's say they're not just Bible only, but just, in other words, they just don't adhere to kind of how you're describing this.
Well, there are exceptions to the rules. Charles Spurgeon, John Gill are men who did not receive formal training, but very few of us are John Gills or Charles Spurgeons. And I think it's easy to overestimate yourself and your ability, and you don't want to do that. You need to be careful not to think too highly of yourself. Those men were well educated, autodidacts is the technical term. They're trained by themselves, but they had the capability to be able to do so. There's not a lot of us who can do that, and we really need the the instruction of others, the help of others to think through things. Whoa, I don't know why all of a sudden I have the hiccups.
No, sure. I mean, reading those books you described and others, I mean, they bring those guys that write those books, they bring such a depth to the text that you probably may never get on your own. I mean, you're just tapping into a
Yeah,
life of a theologian when you read those books, right? They devote their
that's
life to that topic, right?
exactly right. Yeah, you tend, if you don't have the kind of stimulation to help you learn new ideas and to think through new things, or just to examine the ideas that you're presenting, I think often you end up with a stale kind of ministry, and you need stimulation to be able to probe deeply into the Word of God. It has depths that we will never be able to sound, and we can't do that on our own. We need the help of others to do so. I had a friend. He was going to be one of our original professors, and then he passed away from a brain tumor about 7 years ago. But he used to say, if a pastor can't work in the Greek New Testament and Hebrew Old Testament, then his people are two steps removed from what Isaiah said or what Paul said. And I think he's right. We have trustworthy English translations, but they're still English translations. They're not what we would find if we were able to work in the Hebrew and Greek. So I think a lifelong ministry. Let's say that a young man he's 25, graduated from college, wants to go into the pastoral ministry. Roughly speaking, all things being equal, he has 40 or 45 years that he can expect to serve. Well, that his service is going to reflect the depth of what he learns and what he knows. And the more equipment that he has, the better he will be to serve in the future. You know, Sports Fan Outreach International, you know that the best performers, Major League Baseball, NFL, NHL, NBA, whatever they are the ones who have spent the most time preparing for the work that they do. And even the guys who maybe are one and done in college, they still have a great background upon which to draw. Their careers are only going to be maybe in the NFL. What is it, 5 years at the most? If you're a Hall of Fame baseball player, 15 to 20 years. But the 15 to 20 years is a result of all of that you did while you were younger and preparing you. There's an analogy there. And I would suggest that I love sports. I'm a sports guy, but the ministry is more important than sports. The the service that we give to Christ is more important than sports. The ministry that we perform on behalf of souls is more important. We need a solid basis upon which to do that work.
Okay, great. Last question. I'm going to combine two things. One, Heath Futzel asked, what about someone who's pursuing the education online? I guess you might just call it auditing without pursuing a degree. Do you encourage that?
We only generally do that for men who are already in pastoral ministry, elders, pastors, and sometimes deacons.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
we don't make those available just to the average layperson.
All right. And then finally, if you're going to give an argument, you might say for men to really consider entering the pastorate, entering Christian ministry, what would you tell them? Like, what is the end game of being in the ministry? What have you seen that someone who's not in it can't see, and you exhort them to enter that world?
I would say the ministry is difficult. It's a challenge. It requires humility. It requires lifelong study. Um, it is not a place for ease. If somebody's looking for an easy life and an easy job, don't go. Don't go into the ministry. But if you're a person who is motivated to serve for the glory of God and for the good of souls, then the ministry is the place for you. And so you just have to think in those terms. It's a good thing for someone to be an electrician and a plumber or an insurance agent or a CEO of a bank. Those are good things for Christians, so long as you do them for the glory of God. And there's nothing wrong with those things. But if there's something inside of you that pulls on you to say, I want to serve Christ specifically, I want to dedicate my life to Him in this way for His glory and the good of others, that's what you have to do. You have to pursue it.
Fantastic. Dr. Renihan, thanks so much. What a treat to see you. And
Good to see you too. Do you mind if I give our website out?
I posted on the chat here.
Okay.
Yeah, I posted there already.
Good.
irbsseminary.org. Is that good?
Right. 2 S's in the middle. irbsseminary.org. Yep.
And do you want a contact email or number for someone either to reach you or someone that works with you if they have questions?
On the front page of the website, there is a little box they can click on, and they can contact us directly that way.
Fantastic. Great. Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Good to see
You're welcome.
you.
It's good to see you too, brother. Yeah. All right. God bless you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Yeah, what a treat. We could ask him 1,000 questions, be here all day, and love listening to what he has to say. So I'll encourage you, obviously, to listen to what he had to say about getting educated and how it all works together, and tapping into the knowledge and wealth of knowledge that men have come before us. Men are alive today, but a lot of men have come before us. The Spirit of God has revealed to them. I mean, personally, in my own case, that's what really helped me understand Scripture quite a bit, reading, quote, commentaries, and so forth. It is one thing I've noticed over the years, just as an aside, is that a guy with a Bible, like Dr. Renihan said, it's not always a good thing, because there's, for some reason, that process is not always a situation when you get past just what I call just the flatness of the text, just the literalness of the text, and there's such depth there. So I'm certainly an advocate for getting going to seminary, getting educated, and so forth. But Dr. Renihan, a great guy. I saw on his website. I met his son, I guess, a couple of years ago. We were in Los Angeles working on the Super Bowl, and actually a local pastor who Dr. Renihan introduced me to, Nathan White. He's up here in Chattanooga as well. So a lot of good guys in the Reformed Baptist world. He's got a great faculty, a who's who of faculty there as well. So check it out and contact them with your questions, hopefully, and begin the process of entering the pastorate. Thanks so much for listening today. Take care.